Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I've done one of these discussion videos or video essays, whatever you want to call them. But I figured it was about time to make another one, especially with how Bleed is currently in Path of Titans. And I've got some pretty cool ideas on how to solve the problem. And in this video too, I will also include a way to solve the solo playing issue. Although I don't really know how to fix the solo players grouping up on solo servers. I don't really know how to fix that because, for some reason people are just allergic to actually playing by themselves and not relying on a giant group to kill people in this game. I don't know. It's just kind of ridiculous. And at the moment, I don't see a real way to solve that issue, but that's not what this video... Wow, I can't even talk. But that's not what this video is for. I actually have a script here, so if you hear something in the background with this super sensitive new mic, let me know how it sounds on your end. I think it sounds better than the other one, because the other one had like this weird electronic droning noise during recordings that I would hear while editing, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. But this mic, I think, sounds a lot better. My only problem with it is that it picks up like every little noise. It's like super sensitive, and I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. Just let me know what you guys think in the comments. But yeah, let's get started. I have a script here, actually printed out. I don't know why I printed it out. I could just read it off the Google Doc that I made. I don't know why I had to print it off. But yeah, if you hear some like paper rustling in the background, that's what that is. Like, yeah, you might hear that from time to time. That's what that is. It's just to make sure that I stay on topic and I don't get sidetracked, because sometimes I do that. Speaking of sidetracked, we should probably get started on the actual meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today. So, as of April 2026, Path of Titans roster balance has been under a lot of scrutiny, mainly because of how Bleed has been getting a lot of favor in the balance compared to every other status effect in the game. Although I won't talk too much on Dazed, Paralysis, and Toxin, mainly because those are just kind of fine as is, and very few dinosaurs actually have them. And those are relatively new as well. Those are new mechanics. Those haven't been in the game for as long as what I would call the big three, which are Bleed, Bone Break, and Venom. And we're going to be talking about each of those today. Venom less so, mainly because there's only one creature that has it now, and it's likely going to get a rework with that creature's TLC. So I won't talk about it too much. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm going to get into today. But yeah, the other mechanics have either been nerfed to hell or been reconstructed into a vastly inferior mechanic, a skeleton of its former self, while Bleed has just been getting stronger and stronger with each update because the dinosaurs that have it are better at utilizing it than the other dinosaurs are at using the other status effects. Mainly I'm talking about Fracture, because Fracture is one of I think it's the second status effect with the most dinosaurs that have it, at least in the base roster. I think Bleed has the most dinosaurs using it, and Fracture has the second most, which makes it very important because the two are going to come into contact a lot more. So it makes sense to discuss them together, especially because Fracture is meant to counter the Bleeders. But at the moment, as you can tell by me making this video, it doesn't do a great job at that. But anyways, let's get into talking about Bleed. Bleed in Path of Titans is a status effect that keeps you in combat, which reduces your healing by 50%, and it deals damage over time based on the amount of bleed you have, and the amount of bleed resistance you have. Dinosaurs that have this ability are usually highly mobile with good stamina, as they have no way to restrict your mobility. If anything, they want you to run, This is because bleed increases or decreases based on how fast you move. Bleeding heals way faster when sitting or sleeping, but this leaves you vulnerable. You take increased damage when you're sitting or sleeping. Experienced players know this, especially from their first time sitting next to the water and getting munched by a Sarcosuchus, which is honestly not really common anymore after the TLC, but that's a different story. Bleed stays the same when stood still, but will increase if you walk, trot, or sprint. Dinosaurs in the game with a bleed are as follows: Achillobator, Allosaurus, Concavinator, Deinonychus, Uranosaurus, Latin Venatrix, Suchomimus, Tyrannotitan, Amargasaurus, Dinochirus, Kentrosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Styracosaurus. Now, for this next part of the video, I was going to go into Venom, but I'm not going to go into it as in-depth as I was, mainly because Megalania is the only creature that has it now, and I want to wait until it's TLC until I can make a full opinion on it. I did mention Metriacanthosaurus a little bit in here, but I also said the same thing, like I want to wait till its TLC comes out to, see how that goes. But the TLC is obviously out now, and it doesn't have the venom anymore. It actually has toxin, which I think is a much more interesting way to do it, instead of having two similarly sized, or well, I say similarly sized, but Metri is like twice Megalania's size carnivores with the mechanic. And I think Venom might get a rework or something with Megalania's TLC, but we will have to see how that goes. So I'm not really going to go into Venom. Though I will say, how Venom used to work was it would drain your stamina. And as long as you had Venom, you were basically to have no stamina. So while your stamina was being drained, you had to manage it and try to budget what abilities you're going to use. Okay, where am I going to go to, like, get terrain advantage or something, or just try to kill the Megalania as fast as possible. But if there was a group of them, it just made them a menace, and they could basically easy kill Apexes, because they're also really hard to hit due to them being super low to the ground. Now, Venom has been changed to reduce your stamina regeneration. So, if you're running low on stamina, and you have Venom on you, getting stamina back is way harder now. But even then, that is a worse version of how the mechanic used to work, although the way it worked before was also pretty OP, and didn't really have a counter, especially with Megalania already having pretty strong stats. So, essentially, that's how Venom was, that's how Venom is now, but we'll have to see how the Megalania TLC goes in order to expand on Venom any further in conversations like this. Now, let's get into Fracture and Bone Break, because that is the real meat and potatoes of this video, due to there just being more to discuss with it. It's an actually more fleshed out mechanic, there's plenty of dinosaurs that use it in their TLC, and there's more dinosaurs that have it than Venom, because obviously only one creature has it now, unless you want to count Rhamphorhynchus, which you shouldn't. Now, Fracture and Bone Break is very divisive, and many players can agree that it's okay. Other players will think that it needs work. I have seen more people say that it kind of needs work, depending on what dinosaur is using it, obviously, because there's some dinosaurs who can make better use of it than others. And then there is a delusional minority who think that it's way too powerful, to which I say, skill issue. All jokes aside, I don't think Fracture should be completely reversed, given the more diverse set of playables that have the mechanic now. It wouldn't end well if it went back to how it used to work, especially with all the smaller dinosaurs like Pachycephalosaurus and Ceratosaurus having it, and we all remember how Ceratosaurus was when it did have instant bone break, and that was not fun for anybody, except for the Ceratosaurus using it. But anyways, this is how Bone Break used to work. It would dramatically reduce your opponent's mobility, and usually activated by a wind-up attack with a decent cooldown to avoid spammability. Sometimes it would be linked to other attacks. That way you couldn't just Bone Break and then start attacking, even though that was kind of the only way to counter bleeders until they added that. I mean, bleeders weren't OP back then as they are now, but they were still pretty strong, and the fracture build dinosaurs were meant to counter that. To which they were better at doing it back then because bleed wasn't as powerful, and Bone Break was stronger. But even then, those link cooldowns really killed me, man. They were killing me. But anyways, Bone Break back then had no fracture, no immunity, nothing like that. It was just straight up Bone Break. Wind up attack, you land it on their body, and it does Bone Break. But yeah, that's essentially how it worked. Many people can agree that that was kind of superior, especially when it came to dealing with bleeders. But again, with the greater amount of creatures that have it now, would you really want to give instant Bone Break to Iguanodon, Pachycephalosaurus, and Ceratosaurus? I really don't think so. And Tylosaurus as well. Would you really want to give Tylo instant Bone Break? Or Anno with its new AoE abilities? I really doubt that you'd want to do that. And Dasp with its really high speed and better group abilities, I don't think you'd want to give it instant Bone Break either, even though Dasp desperately needs some help after its treatment the past few updates. But that is a discussion for another video. But after the Daspletosaurus TLC, speaking of the dinosaur, Bone Break fell off immensely. Now they've replaced it with Fracture, which you all are well familiar with. Once 100% Fracture is reached, although depending on how much Fracture you have, it slows you down, which I will say that the difference between 80% Fracture and 60% Fracture is actually kind of crazy. And you are significantly faster when you only have 60% rather than 80, when it should just be a minor decrease, between that gap, honestly. And Fracture wears off fairly quickly, quicker than most other status effects, which doesn't make much sense, but anyways. After 100% Fracture is reached, and you're using an ability that can cause a Bone Break, you will then convert all of that Fracture into a Bone Break for the next 8 seconds. But as soon as you do that, a timer for 60 seconds, I had to think about that for a sec, but yeah, a timer for 60 seconds starts where your opponent is immune to being fractured any further. And this happens right when you land that Bone Break, by the way. So even if, by some miracle, you manage to actually Bone Break a Tyrannotitan, by some miracle you manage to do it, it's probably already gotten you really, really low, and it took a lot of stamina to get it to that point. And it only has that for 8 seconds. And sure, it disables like movement abilities and this, that, and the other. But at the same time, you only have it for 8 seconds. And they are completely immune to being fractured any further after those 8 seconds are up. At least for the next 60 seconds. Which, can I say, is just really, really biased. Because paralysis and dazed, sure, they don't last as long. But, they are much less, or much more restricting. Paralysis locks you in place and keeps you from doing anything for 2 seconds. And then dazed for 2 or 3 seconds still allows you to move around, but it makes you slower and unable to perform any attacks, any abilities whatsoever. Which, more restricting. But the immunity timers on those are significantly less. It's only 40 seconds for the dazed immunity, and paralysis immunity, if I recall, is only 20 seconds. Meanwhile, fracture has a whole 60 seconds and is the least punishing of the three. And it's the easiest to heal off. It's just kind of silly. Although there are fewer dinosaurs with those mechanics, so it's whatever. And we're not talking about those right now. We're going to focus on fracture. Speaking of fracture, dinosaurs in the game currently that have fracture are as follows: Anodontosaurus, Iguanodon, Pachycephalosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Daspletosaurus, Tylosaurus, and Tyrannosaurus. So as you can see, there are a lot more dinosaurs that have bleed than fracture, and fracture is a nerfed version of bone break. Now, why is bleed stronger, you might ask? Well, a lot of the dinosaurs that have bleed are significantly faster than the dinosaurs that do not. And to compensate for this, typically the dinosaurs without bleed would have way stronger damage and a status effect that would be able to counter that dinosaur or have the mobility to get away from the dinosaur with bleed. But there is a significant portion of the roster that doesn't have either a status effect to counter it or the ability to get away. Some of the biggest culprits here are T-Rex, Anodontosaurus, and Daspletosaurus. Now, Anodontosaurus is probably the strongest of those three. Anodontosaurus has plenty of armor-based abilities and has an ability called Tenderize, which can bypass bone break immunity. And this is a mechanic that I will be bringing up later, because I think it could be very useful if applied to a different dinosaur. Those of you who are familiar with my channel likely know what dinosaur I'm referring to. But anyways, Tenderize will definitely come up later. But the dinosaurs that don't have bleed, but have fracture instead, have become so heavily reliant on extra buffs to gain stronger that it allows the bleeders to just abuse it. The bleeders can keep you from getting your stronger damage by just waiting out your buffs. If you pop any buffs or hit them with fracture to get a damage buff like Ano, Dasp, and T-Rex does, then they can just wait it out. They'll just wait until the status effect is over or until your buff call runs out and it's on cooldown so they can abuse you. And the bleeders still would do slightly less damage than their fracturing opponents, but things like Tyrannotitan have a heavy bite. Like Tyrannotitan has a 100 damage heavy bite. Sure, if it's using Feast, it goes down to 65%. Or no, it gets reduced by 35%. So it goes down to 65 damage, which is 5 more damage than the T-Rex bite, which wouldn't be so bad if Feast didn't drastically increase your healing and stamina regeneration. Combine this with Tyrannotitan's Grandis subspecies, which can heal you 10% faster, and it also has a hide that allows it to heal 35% faster. So it's gaining the really increased healing from Feast, while also healing 45% faster than most dinosaurs. So if it's running a full healing build, and you get it in combat, it is only healing 5% slower than normal. Because the combat timer reduces it by 50% on all dinosaurs. But if Titan is running a full healing build, then it can reduce that debuff to only 5%, making it still heal around just as fast as it normally would. Tyrannotitan is just really, really good at abusing what is known as heal cycling. There are other dinosaurs who can do it as well, but Titan is the best at it, which is why I'm covering it specifically. Heal cycling is essentially when you attack your opponent, and since you have better mobility, or bleed, you can inflict them with that bleed, or just a bunch of damage, get away from them, heal up while they heal slower than you, and then just rinse and repeat until you kill them. And this really isn't a problem on some dinosaurs, like Spinosaurus and Dinosaurus can just go in the water. Bars has good mobility and can stun you, although Bars probably needs a better way of countering Tyrannotitans, because Feast Titan just kind of destroys it, as Feast Titan does with everything else in the roster. And then you have Eotriceratops, which I know I put it in the thumbnail, but Eotriceratops will be discussed in a different video, most likely, given how it doesn't have bleed or fracture, and is probably in a worse spot than T-Rex right now, which T-Rex is already in a bad spot, but Eo might be in an even worse spot. Mainly because it doesn't really have a status effect to help it counter Tyrannotitan, which is its real biggest issue when it comes to this roster. But yeah, Spino and Deinonychirus can just go in the water. T-Rex and Eotrike are basically just cooked. They're basically cooked. There's really nothing they can do, and Bars is just kind of there, and also could probably use some help dealing with Titans, but it doesn't need as much help as Eo and Rex does, given how it has a insanely high health pool with defense buffs, which don't really need to be changed. I think that's fine, and it has very good mobility. Now, my proposal on how to fix this power dynamic with the bleeders and fracturers is to change fracture and all status effects, for that matter, to scale with combat weight. And essentially what I mean by this is that, say for instance, a Pachycephalosaurus is using its charged headbutt to do fracture. It should not do the same amount of fracture to a Concavinator that it does to a Tyrannotitan. The fracture amount, if it were to scale with combat weight, would fluctuate. So it would do about the same fracture to things its size, but if it attacks anything with a combat weight larger than it with its fracture, then the fracture would be reduced because of its higher combat weight. This is actually how damage and knockback works, although knockback doesn't scale quite as dramatically with combat weight as damage does, which, to be honest, it probably should. This would go for bleed. A Concavinator would not be doing the same bleed damage to a Cerato that it would to a T-Rex. You know, the T-Rex would take significantly less bleed because it weighs more. It has a much larger body, so it's harder to bleed out for the Concavinator because it's smaller. It wouldn't be doing as much bleed to it. But currently, it does about the same bleed to things its size as it would to a much larger dinosaur. And again, would go with venom as well. Other status effects, you could find a way to rig it, but I think they don't really scale with combat weight well, like bleed, fracture, and venom would. Like Megalania would be doing more venom to a Pachy than it would to a Spino. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm getting at. So this also helps T-Rex deal with these smaller bleeders. Like, say a giant pack of Concavinators, say maybe about 4 or 5 Concavinators jump a T-Rex. Currently, in the game's balance, Rex has literally nothing to defend itself against a group like that. It takes its entire stamina bar to kill something with its clamp. And unless you're playing on a semi-realism server, that's not going to stop the fight by just killing one of them. If that even kills one of them. Because the thing is, Rex's clamp doesn't really do as much damage as people think it does. It only does 20 damage when you thrash something around. That is 5 damage more than your tail attack. That is mediocre. But anyways, sure, you can buff that damage, but it takes so much stamina to do that. And if you're getting jumped by a giant pack, it's basically pointless. So, if Fracture were to scale with combat weight, you could effectively deal with smaller groups of smaller dinosaurs like that. The same would go for Daspletosaurus and Iguanodon. Dealing with packs of smaller things is exceedingly difficult in this game, unless you have really good mobility. which the bleeders typically do, but the fracture build dinosaurs have really mediocre mobility. Like Dasp just got its precise movement nerfed, and some of its fracture nerfed. But if the fracture actually scaled with combat weight, it would be better. The Dasp would be able to effectively counter things trying to bleed it out, like concavenators or raptors or something, with its fracture abilities, which good luck hitting the raptors with fracture, unless of course it's an Achillobator. But yeah, the fracture would be dramatically increased when used against things smaller than it. But if the Dasp were to try and bone break a Spino, its Bone Snap would be doing significantly less fracture, and it would be more beneficial to use Bone Snap rather than Shatter against a bigger target. This would also work with Bleed. So if a Titan is struggling to get food and it manages to ambush a smaller dinosaur, it can bite it a couple times and do really high damage, but also have done an incredible amount of bleed. And then it can just walk it down if it's inflicted enough bleed and be able to kill it. Because at the moment, Titan really struggles against things faster than it, especially in groups. A group of Dasps can very easily take out a Titan because Titan, again, most of the larger dinosaurs don't have much of a way to counter the smaller dinosaurs. But if their status effects would get increased with their combat weight difference, then it would be a different story. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm getting at. The status effects would increase and decrease based on what combat weight that you're attacking, or the combat weight of the dinosaur that you're attacking. And the T-Rex would be able to inflict instant bone break with its crushing bite or bone snap, depending on whichever it's using, if it's being jumped by something smaller than it. But I also can understand how some of you may be confused, because Tyranotitan is mainly a problem here, and this doesn't really seem to solve the problem with Tyranotitan basically dominating the apexes and not really having a counter. And to which I say it kind of does in Dinokairos, barely. Dinokairos has to fight for its life. It really, really struggles against Tyranotitan. But that's really Titan's only counter aside from groups, which groups just counter everything. So how would I allow, say, T-Rex, because T-Rex is struggling a lot because of Tyranotitan right now, how would I change things for T-Rex? Thanks for an example. Well, now I'm going to introduce to you my idea on how to fix solo play in this game, and how it's basically pointless to try and play solo because of how the game is structured specifically for groups, and solo players get basically nothing. If anything, solo players have just been getting destroyed by the developers because all of the solo buffs have been removed from the game. And that is where I jump into this. We bring back solo buffs, except they're all passives that only activate when you are solo. Because right now, group build T-Rex is actually pretty solid. Which, go figure, 2 T-Rexes are better than 1. But as a solo Rex, you're going to struggle way more than most of the other apexes. Solo Eotrike and solo Rex struggle a lot right now. So, in order to help alleviate this problem, every dinosaur in the game, and I do mean every single playable, would get a passive solo buff that gives them a certain increase, a certain boost. Not too crazy, but something to help them keep up with the other dinosaurs. And I do think that overall, Tyranotitan should probably get a speed nerf, because I think its other abilities I think are fine. I think the healing hide should get a nerf to maybe 15 to 10% healing rather than 35, because 35 is kind of ridiculous given that it already has feast and a healing hide, or a healing passive subspecies. But anyways, these are the solo buffs that I drew up ideas for. Given that apexes fall into these conversations a lot more than most of the rest of the roster, Mainly because they probably need the most help out of everything, except for the semi-aquatics. I think they're in the best spot right now because they can utilize the water, but on Riparia the water is a lot more dangerous, so still, I do think they could use a little help. And I do think, yeah, certain dinosaurs could get some nerfs, like, especially Tyranititan could get a speed nerf. I think it should be slower than it is now. I think it's a bit too fast. But yeah, these are the solo buffs that I drew up ideas for. I got names for them and everything. And they're not crazy buffs, they're just something to help you when you're by yourself and you don't have a group. Starting with T-Rexes. Tyrant King. When solo, Tyrannosaurus gains a 10% damage boost, 50 more HP, and the ability to inflict a stack of Tenderize with its bite attacks. I'll remind you that Tenderize, once at 10 stacks, will disable fracture immunity on the inflicted opponent for the following 5 minutes. Tyrannosaurus will also gain the ability to track corpses within a 300-meter radius. This is to help out with the fact that T-Rex can only eat fresh meat for whatever reason. Dawn Horned Face. When solo, Eotriceratops will gain a 10% increased attack. Gain 10% increased attack damage, 50 more HP, and bleed on its head attacks. So its headbutt and head slam will inflict bleed, and this will allow it to be able to help counter the bleeders by inflicting bleed on them. Bleeders notoriously struggle against other dinosaurs that do bleed because they can't heal cycle it. Terrible Hand. When solo, Dinochirus will gain 15% increased attack damage when dry and 15% increased turning when wet. In addition, Dinochirus will gain 10% increased health and stamina recovery regardless of its wet or dryness. This is just another boost to help Dinochirus stay on top of things, because dry duck isn't necessarily bad, it just needs a little extra damage. Spine Lizard. When solo, Spinosaurus will gain 10% increased healing during the night and 10% increased stamina recovery during the day. In addition, Spinosaurus will gain bleed on its bite, claw attack, and Riptide, but only when you're dry will Riptide do bleed. Barsbold's Hadrosaur. When solo, Barsboldia will gain 10% armor and 10% reduced stamina drain. Barsboldia will also receive 20% increased status healing when quadrupedal, and 50% increased stamina recovery when bipedal. Tyrant Titan. When solo, Tyranititan will have the stamina recovery gained from Blood Soaked doubled. Tyranititan will also gain the ability to track corpses and bleeding players, I misread that, within a 300-meter radius. Similar to T-Rex, but it can also track things that are bleeding. These are just a few examples I cooked up on the fly. If you guys have any ideas for others for your favorite dinosaurs, or have an idea for ones I've already done, be sure to leave it in a comment down below. But that is going to have to do it for now. Thank you guys for watching. God bless you. Christ is King. Love you all, and have a blessed day. And again, be sure to let me know your feedback. I know I kind of covered two bases here, and I advertised this as a fracture video, but I also wanted to touch on the solo thing, because that also kind of coincided with the fracture idea, because it's mainly T-Rex and Dasp that struggle the most with fracture at the moment, encountering the heal cycling bleeders that can basically just keep you taking damage while you're bleeding, while they can back off and just heal constantly and just cycle that until you're dead. You know, Dasp and Rex are the ones that really struggle with that the most, because they don't have the mobility of some of their peers. Dasp is pretty fast, but with Aloe's new speed increase, it's going to struggle a lot more to kill Aloe. Especially with Shatter also getting a nerf, which I don't know why you would nerf the worst ability on Daspletosaurus. It just doesn't make any sense. It already did really mediocre damage in Fracture, and now you've just reduced it even more. It's just kind of silly, especially with how fast Fracture wears off. But say things like Ceratosaurus and Pachycephalosaurus, they don't struggle as much because they actually have speed. They can actually use their speed and mobility to keep up with their opponents and keep the fracture piled on. Anodontosaurus plays defensively, so it can be a bit more flexible with its fracture because you have to go to him in order to actually fight him, because he's going to fight defensively and he's going to break your legs while fighting defensively, and then he'll be able to play a bit more aggressively once he's actually bone broken you. And then there's Iguanodon, which would just be doing more fracture things smaller than it, because fracture against things your size as Iguanodon isn't as useful, because you don't really have an ability to spam while running like you used to. Iguanodon used to like poke its thumb out before the TLC, but now the only abilities it can really do while running is its thumb barrage, which like locks it in place when it does that, or just like it forces you into bipedal stance, so it makes you slow down before you have to like get back into running. And then you can do your tail attack and charge while running, and that's about it. And yeah, I'm also unsure as to if Iguanodon still has fracture on its arm slam. I think it does, but I might be thinking of a server with stat changes. But I'm pretty sure Iguanodon in base stats does have fracture on the arm slam. I haven't played Iguanodon in a hot minute, so please clarify that for me in the comments. Ankylosaurus doesn't really struggle with its fracture because it's super fast. There's just some last things I wanted to cover and just clarify before ending the video here. Sorry for the whole yap sesh at the end here, but yeah, that is it for the video. Thank you guys for watching. God bless, and have a good one.